2025 to 2026 through 2029 to 30 capital improvement and equipment plan. And do we have, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to our city manager to read the title and to introduce to the city council.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To add on to the title you read, we are considering two different resolutions tonight. Resolution number 7638, adopting a budget for fiscal year 25-26 and appropriating the amount specified therein as expenditures from the various funds. And resolution 7639, adopting a capital improvement and equipment plan for fiscal years 2025-26 through 29-30. In both instances, we would recommend that you find that it is not a project under the California Environmental Quality Act and adopt both resolutions. We were also asking you tonight to authorize us to transfer $10 million from our general fund into the capital and equipment funds and the various pension stabilization funds that we have in order to better provide for long-term savings. And I'll explain that a little more as I go through my presentation. So if we can have the presentation up, that would be great. Look at that, it's working. So we'll go through a little review of where we are with fiscal year 24-25. We'll talk about the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, the few new programs we have identified for this coming fiscal year, and then we'll go through the capital and equipment fund plans, and then talk about some challenges that we have potentially to our budget in the coming year, or really several years potentially. So the snapshot of this, and the City Council saw this at the budget study session, so I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did in the budget study session, but to highlight this, the last time we were here before the council, we were talking about $2 and $3 million deficits in the fiscal year 24-25 budget. I'm happy to report that we now show a positive expected fund balance for the fiscal year 24-25. It's not a huge positive, it's $34,000. If you look at the bottom of the middle column there, that's what we now expect to happen, is that we will have $34,000 more of revenue than we have in expenditures, but that's far better than $2 or $3 million in deficits. How did we achieve that? We kept programs in place, we kept services in place, but we looked for areas for savings and all of that. And we also had some revenue enhancements that we weren't expecting. So everything has been positive on both sides of the ledger. You see that in some respects, we started out even this year $2 million better than we expected to. So you really have a $4.2 million swing from when we looked at the amended budget in the mid-year to what we're looking at now. So, and $4.2 million is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but in a $100 million budget, it's not a significant swing. So we're talking about big dollars, so small changes add up pretty quickly in our fund. So where are those changes coming from? Taxes are our biggest revenue source at over $61 million. It's almost exactly what we predicted it would be. So Henry is right on with his taxes and assessments sort of estimations. We'll show you that some were up and some were down, but on the whole, we're pretty much exactly where we expected to come in. Excuse me, if you look at the use of money and property, about the fourth line down, that's a 21.5% difference from what we were expecting, about $650,000 extra in that area. And that's basically fees and revenues from investments coming in a little higher than we expected. You also will see that charges for current services are much higher than we expected them to be. And in some respects, that's really, or in most respects, that's because of the Eaton fire and other regional fires that we responded to. The cost reimbursements come into that account. So in the tax and revenue area for fiscal year 24-25, we are under in the sales and use taxes. The activity at the mall and other retail outlets have been lower than we expected. Things have slowed down a little bit. On the positive side, our property taxes came in higher than expected. In the front end of the year, property taxes came in exactly where we expected them to. What's happened since the front of the year is that there have been more transfers than we anticipated, more reassessments than we anticipated. So some of those homes that may have sold late last year got reassessed in the middle of the year, and now we're seeing the positive revenue benefit. And same thing with properties. When large commercial properties come into effect, those new assessments hit and we get property taxes. So that's the largest single change, is almost $750, or a little over $750,000 in that one line item. Everything else just trending pretty much exactly where we predicted or are fairly small dollar amounts. The other area I'll point out is the transient occupancy tax. We see that's a little lower than we anticipated. It's another sign of a potential slowing of the retail and the travel industry, another thing that gives us pause as we look for this coming fiscal year and beyond. So what are our fund balances right now? And this leads to the conversation we had at the budget study session about transferring money to our long-term savings. In total, we have about $73.5 million in various general fund, unrestricted kinds of reserves for the city. Last year, we were talking about $70 million, so that's actually gotten stronger because we've had better than expected returns. In that first blue column where you see $25.84 million, I colloquially refer to that as our checking account. It's our general fund balance. We only need $8 to $10 million, really more like $5 to $6 million to operate, to have cash flow purposes. We don't earn high interest rates on that checking account because we invested in short-term investments. In the columns on the right, from the red column over, we put those in more long-term investments because we anticipate spending those only when we need to, only when rainy days happen, or over a 5 or a 10-year period. So if you put the same dollar in the blue column versus the other 4 columns, your interest will be much higher in the other 4 columns than the blue column. So when I ask you to move $10 million from the blue column into those columns on the right, it's to make sure that we have the money in the future, but also that money that we have deposited earns a stronger return on investment, and that's always good for us. So the other accounts, we have a 20% emergency reserve. We have a capital improvement fund at $6 million. You'll hear me later talk about we're going to put more money into the capital reserve than the equipment reserve. The equipment replacement reserve is that $20 million purple line. You can see it's much more significantly funded right now than the capital fund. So we're going to ask you to transfer more into the capital fund to make up more ground in that fund, and we don't need quite as much in the equipment replacement. And then we have a self-insurance reserve at a little less than $6 million. And there are other reserve accounts and trust accounts we have, but these are the big guys. So with that information, with kind of an uncertain economy, with a better than expected revenue outlook, and that, what does the fiscal year 25-26 proposed budget look like? We developed it with an anticipation that we don't really know where the budget and the finances of the nation are going, where the state are going, or even locally. There are a lot of indicators that could go either way. So we have a very conservative sort of zero-based, flat line, kind of status quo budget. I said a lot of platitudes there, but basically we're not anticipating any growth. We're also not anticipating any significant negative swings. What we've done as a staff internally is we're planning, if we do have an economic downturn, to be able to respond to that immediately and to react to it. So we have plans behind the scenes that if we never needed to enact them, we could enact them, but this budget anticipates kind of more of the same from fiscal year 24-25 coming forward. So again, we have that $27 million balance. We again would ask you to transfer 10 of that to bring it down to 17, but that's not anticipated on this slide. We have revenues of about $92.5 million, expenditures of about $91 million, and then transferring money into long-term savings, total of about $4.8 million. 1.9 of that would go into the equipment fund, and then, as I said, a little bit more, 2.9 going into the capital fund. So a total of 4.8 going into our long-term savings and leaving you an operating fund balance of almost exactly break even. In this case, it's $88,400 to the good. So 24-25 balanced, 25-26 is balanced, no services cut, no employment positions cut, any of that. It's just not spending where we don't have to, not adding where we don't need to, not buying things that we can wait another year or two to purchase. Those kinds of choices we're making. So in all, you'll end up 25-26 if you implement this budget and it comes true. It will be fairly similar at the end that what we're starting with. What are we anticipating from a revenue standpoint? Taxes going up in general about 2%, which is within sort of normal growth patterns. We do have about 16.5% expectation of licenses and permits going in. That's because we have some large projects that originally were slated to hit our books in fiscal year 24-25 that we expect to come to life in 25-26. It's some larger multi-use developments that are around mostly the downtown area. We have a new hotel that's coming online, so you'll see that on the next slide, and that's adding to some of the growth in the revenue side of things. We do expect some decreases in things like charges for current services because we're hoping there won't be another Eaton fire, or we're hoping there aren't a very active fire season, so you see a negative in that fund balance. But overall, 3% growth in the economy, and that's largely coming from, like I said, the new hotel coming online, the Hilton comes online, so that we're anticipating about 11% increase. That's kind of the middle of the transient occupancy taxes. Everything else, we're expecting a continuation of the sales and use tax to be a downward trend, unfortunately, but again, the budget is balanced even anticipating this downward trend. Property taxes in the city of Arcadia are pretty reliable. If you look at a 10-year trend, it's like a straight up and to the right kind of curve. We're expecting 2.4% growth, which is far less than the growth we've had in the last 10 or 15 years. So it's a conservative estimate, but we are pretty confident that we'll hit that. We're seeing some softness in areas like property transfers and some of our other taxes and the utility users taxes and those kinds of things. So those are very modest, either small growth or negative growth in those areas. But overall, taxes, which is our biggest area, is only growing by 1.88%. So a very conservative budget. This is sort of what has happened in the last number of years in our various large tax areas. This is sales taxes. You can see when Measure A went into effect, where we went from 12.3 million to 24.8 million in a year. That was all really because, or a 2-year window, that was all because of Measure A taking effect. And you can see from 2020 on, or excuse me, 2022 onward, a slight downward trend. So we're expecting a slight downward trend in that. We hope for relief and excitement at the mall and the car dealership and those kinds of things, but we're not seeing it, so we're not necessarily anticipating it right now. Property taxes, this is that lovely curve I was talking about earlier. You can't make a better growth history than that. This is the kind of thing that gives us the AAA bond rating when we've gone out in the past. And we anticipate this angle to continue, but not necessarily as steep as it has been in the last couple of years. It may very well be this steep, but we're not budgeting for that. Utility users taxes, a little bit all over the place. It's up, it's down. When we all worked from home, you saw there was a big spike. Now it's been trending downward a little bit, so we're expecting pretty flat, slight uptick, but only because utility rates are going up kind of everywhere. Hotel tax, you can see when our first new hotel came online at the closure of the pandemic and everybody started traveling again. And then we're expecting that growth to continue, plus a new hotel coming in the fourth quarter of 2025. Where do we spend our money? We're a service-based organization, and we're spending our money on employees for the most part. So, 63% of our overall budget is on the city employees that are here at $60 million. The supplies and services, the stuff that we buy, that sort of thing, is about 30%. And then replacing equipment and sending things out to long-term savings and other kinds of accounts make up the rest of our expenditures. So specifically, where do we spend our money? We always say that public safety is number one, and you look at this graph and you can see that public safety is number one, that police at 35% of our budget, fire at 29% of our budget, so over 60% of our total budget is police and fire, 65% at this point. I always can't help myself but point out that Public Works is the largest department by number of employees. It just doesn't show up in this slide because Public Works has a lot of funding that comes outside of this general fund budget, so that doesn't quite show up there. Development Services also tends to be much larger than shown here, but they get their funding from various grant funds in a lot of cases. You can see library, recreation, general manager kind of accounts are all generally in the 3 to 5% of our overall budget range. Administrative services, human resources were split out into 2 different departments last year. So while they used to also be around 5% of our budget, now it's 4% and 1%. So in the general fund study, kind of the looking back and looking forward a little bit, the estimated budget, like I said, is balanced at $34,000. In fiscal year 25-26, we're anticipating it to be generally balanced again. And then if we continue with our known increases in costs, if we continue with sort of normal budgetary financial trends, we do show a negative budget in fiscal year 26-27. It's a manageable. If you remember at one point we were looking at a $3 million deficit in this fiscal year. We now show a positive balance. Likewise, in 26-27, we're showing a $3 million plus or minus negative balance, but it can be managed and paid attention to. Right now, it's just a kind of a canary in the coal mine. If we don't pay attention to things, we may be in trouble, but I am confident that the management team can make sure that the 26-27 budget is balanced when that time comes. But if nothing changes and the economy stays kind of stagnant, the expenditures that we know about are going to outpace the revenues, and we need to keep an eye on that. This is another way of looking at that same graph. I don't expect you to be able to read all of these little numbers at the bottom, but I'll tell you that in the chart at the top, you want the green to be on top of the red. You want your revenues to be on top of your expenditures. And while in the past they've been on top of it, in the future, in the current years, they're right at each other. In the future years, if we don't make any changes, the red's going to be on top of the green, and that's not the way we like to see it. These are not spreads that cause shock to the system. They're all 2 and 3 million kind of numbers. You can't quite tell, but they're getting smaller every year. The red's getting closer to the green as you go out. We just need to keep managing it and paying attention to it and living within our means. We have hotels, we have large development projects that are coming in out years that aren't anticipated in this revenue outlook. This is sort of just a general stress test of what we know about and large scale sort of general trends. But we need to pay attention to the future, as all this really is showing you, is we need to not outpace the growth of our organization naturally. And of course, all of this changes if the economy changes rapidly with it. So new programs, like I said, it's a very conservative budget year, and we're not asking for a lot because there's not a lot of room in the budget. And we're also, we've asked for a lot in the last 3 or 4 years, so we've got a lot of new things, and we're implementing those new things. It's not a large time for more new things. But where we're asking for new dollars, about $11,000 in the city clerk's office. This is our public-facing public records portal. It'll allow more people to access our public records. We are seeing that what's happening is more people are using it than we have licenses for, so this will allow us more licenses so city staff and the public can access our public records more effectively and efficiently. In the police department, a Sharp Performance app at $28,700. That's basically a wellness program for the police department to ensure that our officers are taking care of themselves and are performing at the highest levels, both emotionally and strategically. In the fire department, we're looking for $80,000. All of these, by the way, are one-time costs to implement. The standards of coverage assessment basically reviews what we're doing and to establish policies and protocols and make sure that we are living up to those policies and protocols about response times and quality of care and those types of things. So this is a one-time assessment that we'll then implement over time. And the community emergency response team, a lot of times we refer to that as a CERT team. This would be an ongoing program that it basically allows our residents to become volunteers to assist us in an emergency. So help us with road closures, help us with emergency responses, help us with medical evacuations and those kinds of things, to have a team of residents who are trained up and know what to do in a case of an emergency to help expand the professional services that we provide, both as a police, fire, and community response in general. So all in all, $132,000 this year we're asking for, and then $12,500 ongoing. Very nominal new programs, but they are essential and important new programs. I think I just explained these, but and they're explained further in the staff report as anybody is interested in the details of them. So moving on to the capital and equipment funds. The capital improvement fund is total expenditures about $24.4 million in various capital projects. These are long-term, big cost kind of items, building maintenance and repairs and road maintenance and repairs, those types of things. About 20% of the funding comes from the capital improvement fund. That's the general fund dollars that we move over into that fund. The other 80% of those dollars come from various grants we get at the state and local level, federal level as well. A lot of it this year is in an other kind of account. It's not usually that dark blue 50% line. It's because we had a settlement a couple of years ago with some companies that had contaminated the groundwater in Arcadia. This is us implementing water facility upgrades in response to those, so we can make sure that our wells are clean and clear and our water is pure. So that's a big investment this time that's happening that doesn't usually happen at that level. So some major projects that are part of that $24 million, annual pavement rehabilitation of about $2.5 million, $6 million for, is that a 6? I'm sorry, sorry, my eyes are getting old. $6 million at adding treatment is one of the settlements I was talking about. $4.5 million for bikeways and sidewalks along Colorado and the 210 freeway to make that a safer thoroughfare, and that was provided, a large chunk of that was provided by a grant from Congresswoman Chu's office. Sewer main replacements throughout the city. You see the kind of orangish pink shading, the big number 3 in the middle, that's the area of town that will get the annual residential slurry program. You can see some other of the projects, the well projects and the sewer main replacements at various parts of town. The kind of orangish lines at the left side of the graph and then at the top of the graph up in the highlands, those segments, those are generally road replacements. So those are beyond just throwing slurry on top of them. We actually have to rebuild those street segments. So you can see a little bit around town. We always provide, so on the large shaded area, we go around the city, 1/8 of the city every year, and in over 8 years, every street gets repaved. In these little orange segments, we look at every street in town and look at the worst ones and rebuild the worst ones. And so these tend to be a little more all over the place and appear random, but they are the worst streets in town and we are rehabilitating them. You'll see some of that in the south end of town. There's also a sewer main and some other arterial projects along the southern portion of the city. So the capital fund balances, you can see that we have a solid balance, but we have some significant expenditures in the next couple of years. And if we only transfer in kind of what we've been transferring or historically transferred in, we'll have $2 or $3 million in that account. We'd like to have more in that account. So when we talk about transferring $10 million from the general fund, this would be one of the places we put it heavily. We also this year, instead of putting an even amount in capital and the equipment fund, we would put an extra $1 million in this fund and underfund the equipment fund by $1 million. So again, to rebuild this balance to ensure both funds are effective over time. So based on the current expenditure and the deposits into that fund, you can see the blue line that goes through this. With what we know about, and if we keep putting in what we have been putting in, that fund will grow over time. That's fantastic to see. In years past, that would go to negative pretty quickly, and the savings we've done in years past and the ongoing savings we're planning on doing will ensure that we have a healthy balance in that capital fund. Moving on to the equipment fund, these are generally vehicles, computers, phones, those types of things that get replaced every 5 to 7 years, but we save for them over time. Unlike the capital fund, most of these dollars come from savings from the general fund. We sometimes get grants, but most of the $3 million you'll see on the next slide come from our general fund savings. What are we spending the money on? About half of it on vehicles this year, communications equipment at 18%, machinery and computers and other kinds of equipment in the various departments make up the rest of it. So what are specifically we replacing? Some vehicles in the water department at $640,000. Police vehicle, patrol vehicles and other kinds of vehicles, $450,000. Radio replacement ongoing in both the police, the fire and public works departments, and all three of those $460,000. Streets vehicles, $250,000, a little more than that. A new generator for the water division at $195,000, and continuing to invest in surveillance trailers and the force multiplying in the police department. There's an additional surveillance trailer of $106,400 in that. So that continues a policy that the council adopted last year. We're continuing that forward. So again, you look at this one, and I won't bore you with the details on that because this graph represents what's going on in this fund. Much like the capital fund, strong balances. We expect that it's going to grow over time, not shrink over time as we look out in the out years. So the amount we're putting into it and their expected expenditures over time look to be appropriate. We historically put in we put in at least the 10-year average of our expenditures, but when we have extra money, we put extra money into these funds, and that philosophy has really worked for us. Both of these funds were at $0 when I first arrived at the city. You can see that they're now stronger and self-sustaining in a much better way. So the council and the staff have really worked together to ensure that these ongoing long-term, high-cost projects are possible. And as the council remembers, one fire truck can cost you $2.5 million, and you have to have the money in that account when the time comes. Even if it takes you 4 years to actually get that fire truck on, you have to be able to pay for the fire truck when the time comes. So what are we expecting to happen in the future is an uncertain economy, and that's really what these next slides really will tell you. Look at that, economic uncertainty. So there's a lot of stuff with tariffs and conversations with tariffs and what's going on in response to potential tariffs and all of that. You see the stock market went down 20% at one point, and now it's kind of recovered all of that 20%. Very difficult budgeting environment. So we're expecting a flat line and then ready to respond to the uncertainty rather than planning for a good day or a rainy day. We're just sort of ready to react. And everything we look at every day is a different data point that is wildly different. Things that economists say they've never seen before are happening every day repeatedly. So we're keeping an eye on things. Pension costs, we know are going up because our salaries have gone up and because in the last number of years, they haven't quite hit their investment goals in some of those years. So we are planning for increased pension costs, and the budget you looked at in the out years also includes those anticipated increases. But we don't know from year to year exactly what those increases are going to be, but we'll keep keeping an eye on those. The other thing you should keep in mind is the budget that you have before you sets aside $1 million total to go into our long-term pension savings funds. These are on top of the required spending we have to give to PERS and the required spending we have to give to our pension bonds. We're setting aside an extra $1 million a year just to invest it and have it for a rainy day, just in case pensions spike like they did in the early part of this century. It's kind of crazy to say the early part of this century. That's how old I am. I can't see, and I'm saying things like the early part of this century. Man. So in summary, we have a balanced budget for 25-26. We also have a balanced budget for 24-25. Both of these have been accomplished with no reduction in service levels and no reduction in staffing levels. We continue to invest in the future. We're putting $500,000 into our pension retirement funds. We're putting $500,000 into our pension stabilization fund. And we're sending $4.8 million total to our capital and equipment savings funds. So, and in addition to that, we will continue to maintain a 20% emergency reserve in addition to our normal general fund reserves that we have. So based on all of that, we would recommend that you adopt Resolution 7638, which adopts the budget for 25-26 and appropriating the dollars needed. We would recommend that you adopt Resolution 7639, which would implement and approve the capital improvement and equipment plans for the next 5 years. And we would request that as we close out the fiscal year 24-25, you give us direction to take $10 million out of that checking account and to transfer it into the long-term savings account so that we can ensure that it's there in the future and also so it earns better interest over time. So with that, staff and I are available and happy to answer any questions you have, and I will turn it over to the City Council for further direction and discussion.
Okay, so I think first we're going to open to public comments.
Unless the City Council has any questions,
Yeah,
that would
you
be
guys have
appropriate.
any questions? Let's go with Councilmember Fu. Do you have any questions? Councilmember Cal? Okay, seems like we don't have any questions. So let's go ahead and have public comments. I'm going to allow 5 minutes for Olivia Tang.